Summer camp was always the highlight of our year. My friends and I looked forward to it all school year long, and this year was no exception. We were a group of 5: Tom, Sarah, Jake, Emily, and me. We had our favorite camping spot deep in the forest, away from the main camp, where we felt we could really let loose and enjoy our freedom. On the second night of our trip, we decided to tell ghost stories around the campfire. The air was warm, and the fire crackled as we each took turns trying to outscare one another. Emily had just finished her story about a haunted house when Jake started his tale about a phantom camper who supposedly roamed these very woods. Legend has it, Jake began, his face illuminated by the flickering flames, that a camper named Daniel disappeared from this camp over 50 years ago. He went for a hike and never returned. They say his ghost still wanders the forest looking for help. We all laughed, brushing it off as another one of Jake's attempts to scare us. But as the night wore on, an uneasy feeling settled over us. The fire burned low, and the sounds of the forest grew louder. The nocturnal chorus of insects and distant hoots of owls felt more sinister than usual. Suddenly we heard rustling in the bushes nearby. Probably just an animal, Sarah said, trying to sound brave. But the rustling grew closer, more deliberate. Tom shone his flashlight in the direction of the noise, and we all gasped. Standing at the edge of our campsite was a boy about our age, dressed in old-fashioned camping clothes. His eyes were hollow, and his face was devoid of emotion. "Hey, are you okay?" I called out, but the boy didn't respond. He just stared at us with an intensity that sent chills down my spine. Jake, ever the skeptic, walked towards the boy. "You can't be serious. This must be a prank." But as Jake got closer, the boy vanished into thin air. We were left staring at the empty spot where he had stood, our hearts pounding in our chests. "Did we just see a ghost?" Emily whispered, her voice trembling. We didn't get much sleep that night. The image of the phantom camper haunted us, and every little noise sent shivers down our spines. The wind rustling through the trees sounded like whispers, and the shadows cast by the fire seemed to dance with malevolent intent. The feeling of being watched was inescapable, and we were all too frightened to sleep. The next morning we packed up and decided to cut our trip short. As we were leaving, one of the camp counselors stopped us. "You kids look like you've seen a ghost," he said with a chuckle. "We think we did," Tom replied, recounting the previous night's events. The counselor's face grew serious. "You know, there's an old legend about a camper named Daniel who disappeared around here. They say his spirit still roams these woods. We left camp that day with a story we would never forget." As we drove away, the forest seemed to close in behind us, as if sealing the secrets we had encountered. We were silent for most of the ride home, each lost in our thoughts. I kept replaying the events in my mind, trying to make sense of what we had seen. A few weeks later, I did some research on Daniel. It turned out that a camper by that name really had disappeared 50 years ago under mysterious circumstances. His body was never found, and the case remained unsolved. The more I read, the more convinced I became that what we saw was not a figment of our imagination. Whether it was a trick of the light, a shared hallucination, or the real ghost of Daniel, we couldn't say. But one thing was certain: we would never underestimate the power of a campfire ghost story again. The forest, once a place of adventure and fun, now held a darker, more sinister connotation. We vowed never to camp in those woods again, and to this day, the memory of the phantom camper remains etched in our minds, a chilling reminder of the unknown lurking in the shadows. Before we get into the next story, if you come for the first time, please make sure to subscribe to a channel and press the bell icon for upcoming scary stories. We need your support. Please share the stories with your friends and family. Thanks. Every summer, Camp Greenwood welcomed kids from all over to enjoy the beauty of its pristine lake and surrounding forests. I had been going there since I was 10, and every year brought new adventures and friendships. But there was one story that everyone whispered about around the campfire: the story of the girl in the lake. According to legend, a girl named Lily had drowned in the lake decades ago. She was swimming alone when a sudden storm hit, and she never made it back to shore. Some campers claimed they had seen her ghostly figure in the water, especially on stormy nights. One particularly hot summer night, a few of us decided to sneak out for a midnight swim. The counselors had warned us against it, but the allure of the cool water was too tempting. As we tiptoed down to the lake, the moonlight cast eerie shadows on the still surface. The trees around us rustled with a whispering sound, almost as if they were trying to warn us. We were having a great time, splashing and laughing, when suddenly the air grew cold. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. I looked around and saw that the others had fallen silent too, their eyes fixed on something behind me. I turned and saw her, a faint, glowing figure standing waist-deep in the water. Her long hair floated around her, and her eyes were empty and sorrowful. It was Lily. The water around her seemed unnaturally still, as if even the lake was holding its breath. Panic set in. We scrambled to get out of the water, tripping over each other in our haste. The moonlight now felt harsh and unforgiving, casting stark shadows that seemed to reach out to us. When we finally made it to the shore, we looked back and saw that the ghostly figure had vanished, but the air remained frigid, and a thick mist began to rise from the lake, creeping towards us like cold fingers. We ran back to our cabins, dripping wet and terrified. The night seemed to stretch endlessly, filled with the sounds of our own ragged breathing and the distant mournful call of an owl. When we finally reached the safety of our bunks, sleep did not come easily. The image of Lily's sorrowful eyes haunted me every time I closed my own. The next day, we told the counselors what had happened. They listened quietly, their faces grim. "We've heard these stories before," one of them said. "Lily's spirit is said to appear to remind us to be careful in the water. She doesn't want anyone else to suffer the same fate." That night, and every night after, we made sure to stay far away from the lake after dark. The memory of Lily's ghostly figure stayed with us, a chilling reminder of the dangers lurking beneath the calm surface of the water. Even during the day, the lake seemed less inviting, its depths darker and more mysterious. We couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us, just below the surface. A few days later, a sudden storm rolled in, darkening the sky and churning the waters of the lake. As we watched from the safety of the cabins, a strange calm fell over the camp. The wind howled through the trees, and the rain beat down in relentless sheets, but the lake itself seemed almost serene, as if it welcomed the chaos. In the middle of the storm, we saw her again. Lily's ghostly figure stood at the center of the lake, her arms outstretched as if she was trying to reach out to us. Lightning flashed, illuminating her pale form for just an instant, and then she was gone. The storm seemed to intensify after that, as if nature itself was mourning her loss. The counselors decided to gather us all in the main lodge for the rest of the storm. As we huddled together, they told us more about Lily's story. She had been a beloved camper, full of life and joy, before that fateful day. Her parents had donated money to keep the camp running, and in return, the camp kept her memory alive by teaching water safety and respect for the lake. Hearing the full story, we felt a deep sadness for Lily and a newfound respect for the lake. It wasn't just a place for fun and games. It was a place where lives had been lost and memories lingered. We realized that the campfire tales weren't just for entertainment. They were warnings meant to keep us safe. As the storm subsided and the camp returned to its usual routine, we never forgot what we had seen. The lake, once a source of endless fun, had become a place of eerie beauty and quiet reverence. We knew now that Lily's spirit was always there, watching over us, reminding us of the thin line between adventure and danger. Camp Redwood was known for its rustic cabins nestled deep in the forest. My friends and I had been assigned to Cabin 13, which was rumored to be haunted. According to camp lore, a counselor had mysteriously disappeared from that cabin years ago, and strange things had happened there ever since. We laughed off the stories as we unpacked our bags and settled in. The first few nights were uneventful, and we began to think the ghost stories were just a way to scare new campers. But on the third night, things took a turn for the worse. We were playing cards by flashlight when the temperature suddenly dropped. Our breath came out in white puffs, and the room felt icy cold. The lights flickered and then went out completely, plunging us into darkness. "Did you guys feel that?" Tom whispered, his voice trembling. Before anyone could respond, we heard a soft, eerie humming. It seemed to come from all around us, filling the cabin with a haunting melody. We huddled together, our flashlights flickering weakly. The humming grew louder, more distinct, almost like a lullaby sung by a distant voice. Then we saw her, a translucent figure standing in the corner of the cabin. She was dressed in an old-fashioned camp uniform, and her eyes were hollow and sad. She slowly moved towards us, her humming growing louder and more unsettling. We were paralyzed with fear. The ghostly counselor reached out a hand, and as she did, the door to the cabin slammed shut with a deafening bang. The humming turned into a low, mournful wail echoing off the wooden walls. "We need to get out of here," Emily screamed, breaking the spell. We bolted for the door, but it wouldn't budge. The windows were sealed shut, and we were trapped inside with the ghost. The wailing grew louder, more desperate, as if she was pleading for something we couldn't understand. Desperate, Jake grabbed a heavy book and threw it at the door. It shattered the wood, creating a small opening. We scrambled through the gap, cutting ourselves on splinters but too terrified to care. Outside, the air was warm again, and the sounds of the forest were comforting. We ran to the main lodge and pounded on the door until a counselor let us in. We babbled our story, our words tumbling over each other. The head counselor listened and then nodded grimly. "Cabin 13 has always been problematic. We try not to assign anyone there, but sometimes we have no choice. The spirit you're describing is Eleanor, a counselor who disappeared years ago. She was heartbroken over a tragic accident involving one of her campers and has haunted that cabin ever since." We spent the rest of the night in the main lodge, too scared to return to our cabin. The next day we were moved to a different one, and cabin 13 was boarded up. But our ordeal wasn't over yet. A few nights later we were awakened by a distant, familiar humming. It seemed to drift through the trees, carried on the night breeze. We tried to ignore it, convincing ourselves it was just our imagination. But deep down, we knew it was Eleanor, still mourning, still searching. Our experience became the new campfire story for the rest of the campers, but we knew it was no tale. The ghost of Eleanor was real, and she was still mourning in the cabin deep in the woods. One evening, as the sun set and the campfire crackled, we shared our story with the other campers. They listened with wide eyes, glancing nervously at the darkening forest. Just as we finished, the wind picked up, and the eerie humming began again, faint but unmistakable. Everyone fell silent, their faces pale. We huddled closer to the fire, seeking its warmth and light. The counselors tried to reassure us, but their words felt hollow. We knew the truth. Eleanor's spirit was restless, and her sorrow lingered in the shadows of Camp Redwood. The next morning, the head counselor called a meeting. "We need to respect the spirit of Eleanor," he said. "She's part of our camp's history, and we must honor her memory." A memorial was set up near Cabin 13, a small plaque with Eleanor's name and the story of her tragic fate. We left flowers and notes, hoping to bring her some peace. As the summer continued, the humming grew less frequent and the forest seemed to relax. But every now and then, when the wind was just right, we could still hear it, a reminder of the ghost of Cabin 13 and the sorrow that bound her to our camp.